April 19th, 1775 AD. The shot heard round the world. On April 19th, 1775 AD, the British Army and the Patriot Minutemen clashed at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The night before and early into the morning, Paul Revere, Samuel Prescott, and William Dawes took the message to the local Minutemen, warning them that the British Army was coming to destroy and gather arms and to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. About 80 Minutemen who gathered inside the Buckman Tavern stepped outside at the crack of dawn to await the arrival of the British soldiers. This group of Minutemen were part of the town of Lexington's local militia known as a training band, an English term used to describe an early version of the National Guard that was created to defend the American colonists dating back to the Puritan era. The Minutemen's commanding officer, Captain John Parker, ordered his men to form into a parade ground formation in front of the British soldiers who were marching into Lexington. Parker wanted to show the British that they weren't intimidated and to stand their ground as a show of force. He didn't have any plans to fire upon them because he knew they would be easily killed and didn't want to sacrifice his men. A few eyewitnesses said that Parker told the Minutemen to stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if you mean to have a war, let it begin here. But according to a sworn statement he made later, Parker said, I ordered our militia to meet on the commons in said Lexington to consult what to do and concluded not to be discovered, nor meddle or make with said regular troops unless they should insult or molest us, and upon their sudden approach, I immediately ordered our militia to disperse and not fire. Immediately said troops made their appearance and rushed fiercely, fired upon and killed 8 of our party without receiving any provocation from us. British Major John Pitcairn rode forward in the direction of the Patriots after his marching soldiers saw the parade ground formation in Lexington Commons. He waved his sword and called them out to disperse. Captain John Parker, who was dying from tuberculosis and was very congested, told the Minutemen to break formation and leave, but because of all the chaos and shouting from both parties, and due to Parker's raspy voice, most of the Patriots didn't hear or clearly understand his command. Parker and Pitcairn ordered their men not to fire, but a shot rang out. According to British Lieutenant John Barker, 5 o'clock we arrived and saw a number of people, I believe between 200 and 300, formed in a common in the middle of town. We continued advancing, keeping prepared against an attack, though without intending to attack them, but our coming near them, they fired upon us 2 shots, upon which our men, without any orders, rushed upon them, fired, and put them into flight. Several of them were killed. We could not tell how many because they were behind walls and into the woods. We had a man of the 10th Light Infantry who was wounded. Nobody else was hurt. We then formed on the common, but with some difficulty. The men were so wild, they could hear no orders. We waited a considerable time there, and at length proceeded our way to Concord. When the smoke cleared, the militiamen who had plain gunpowder in their rifles began to load musket balls in them and fired upon the British soldiers while others fled the chaotic scene. The soldiers fixed bayonets after a volley of return fire and charged at the remaining Patriots. 8 Patriots were killed and 10 were wounded. The British suffered 1 casualty, a soldier who was wounded in the thigh. British Army Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith arrived with his men around the time the British soldiers were fired upon. He ordered a return fire and bayonet charge. After order was restored, he reformed the soldiers' units and marched towards Concord. The British Army marched into Concord looking for the cache of military supplies that their Loyalist spies told them that the Patriots were hiding. They went to a local tavern owned by Ephraim Jones, who was hiding 3 cannons on his property, which they destroyed, some gun carriages, 100 barrels of flour and salted food, which were tossed into a pond, along with 550 pounds of musket balls. Most of the stuff was recovered later, but the cannons, without the trunnions, which were destroyed, were useless. The locals treated the soldiers very kindly and gave them discounted food and drinks. This ploy was very effective as they served as a distraction while the locals and Patriots moved around caches of weapons and supplies while the soldiers were occupied. Around this time, the Minutemen from around the area were gathering, watching and following the British soldiers' movements in Concord, and were preparing to greet them very warmly. The Minutemen, led by Colonel John Buttrick, who thought the British were burning down the town because he saw smoke coming from the British army destroying the gun carriages, had his men march into a military formation towards the bridge. A company of British soldiers who were stationed on the North Bridge fired off a few warning shots, but they accidentally shot several minutemen. The colonel then said, "Fire, fellow soldiers! For God's sakes, fire!" 3 British soldiers were killed and 9 wounded. The rest retreated back to Concord. According to Minuteman Joseph Thaxter, I was an eyewitness to the following facts. The people of Westford and Acton, some few of Concord, were the first who faced the British at Concord Bridge. The British, who had placed about 90 men as guard at the North Bridge. We had then no certain information that any had been killed at Lexington. We saw the British making destruction in the town of Concord. It was proposed to advance to the bridge. On this, Colonel Robinson of Westford, along with Buttrick, took the lead. Strict orders were given not to fire unless the British fired first. When they advanced about halfway on the causeway, the British fired 1 gun, a second, a third, and then the whole body. They killed Colonel Davis of Acton and Mr. Hosmer. Our people then fired over one another's heads, meeting in long columns, 2 and 2. They killed 2 and wounded 11. Lieutenant Hawkstone, said to be the greatest beauty of the British army, had his cheek so badly wounded that it disfigured him much, which he bitterly complained. On this, the British fled and assembled on the hill, the north side of Concord, dressed their wounded, and began their retreat. As they descended the hill near the road that comes out from Bedford, they were pursued. Colonel Bridge, with a few men from Bedford and Chelmsford, came up and killed several men. Lieutenant Colonel Smith and his soldiers were in shock by the attack on Concord Bridge. After gathering up their dead and wounded, the soldiers finished up their search for weapons and contrabands. They ate lunch and began their march back to Boston around noon, but they would have to run the gauntlet of hundreds of angry Minutemen and locals who wanted to take a shot or two at the British soldiers. The Minutemen hid behind trees, rocks, and stone walls just to take a few shots at the British soldiers whose bright red uniforms made for easy targets. Smith sent out flankers to protect the main force, which was being fired upon by Minutemen snipers, which worked at first, but they were soon overwhelmed by the sheer number of them who were lying in wait, along with the exhausted soldiers running out of ammunition. During one of these engagements, the colonel was knocked off his horse and wounded in the thigh. Major Pecaine took command and tried to root out the hiding Minutemen by using his light infantrymen to chase them away, but he was wounded as well during their counterattack. Fearing for the safety of Lieutenant Colonel Smith, General Thomas Gage sent Lord Earl Percy's brigade of 1,000 strong to rescue the struggling soldiers. Percy's men marched towards Lexington from Charlestown, playing Yankee Doodle to mock the citizens, but they also didn't leave with extra ammunition despite being ordered to. So Gage had sent an ammunition wagon to follow the soldiers, but it was intercepted by a group of militiamen in their 60s. After ignoring their demands to surrender, the ammunition wagon was fired upon and taken by the elderly men. Lord Percy said of the Patriot style of fighting, "During the whole affair, the rebels attacked us in a very scattered, irregular manner, but with perseverance and resolution, nor did they ever dare to form into any regular body. Indeed, they knew well what was proper to do so. Whoever looks upon them as an irregular mob will find himself much mistaken. They have men amongst them who know very well what they are about, having been employed as rangers against Indians and Canadians, and this country being much covered with wood and hilly is very advantageous for their method of fighting." Percy and his soldiers arrived in Lexington to escort the tired and weary troops from Colonel Smith. He ordered the 2 cannons he brought along to be fired at the Minutemen that were following them. The British soldiers took over the Monroe Tavern for a few hours to rest, eat, and dress the wounds of the soldiers that were shot at during their march from Concord. Around 3:30 p.m., the troops, numbered around 1,700, left Lexington for Charlestown. During the 2-hour break in fighting, Joseph Warren sent General William Heath to Lexington to take command of the local group of Minutemen and organize them into a fighting force. One of the tactics he taught the militiamen was to form a moving ring of skirmishers around Percy's marching square so they can fire upon them from a distance, inflicting casualties and minimizing their own. He also got them to spread out and avoid large gatherings to keep the British from firing their artillery at them. He also sent out messengers far ahead of the marching British soldiers to alert the local minutemen to sniper and shoot at the soldiers from behind walls and barriers. General Heath's command invigorated the patriots. The British soldiers had to endure being shot at from minutemen and locals who fired at them from second-story homes and snipers from long distances. Many of the minutemen were experienced deer hunters who were more than willing to ply their skills. The frustrated British soldiers soon began to commit atrocities against civilians when they started to bayonet people in their homes, when they sent flankers out to clear the houses ahead of them for potential snipers and itchy-triggered farmers. By the time the British army arrived at the Minutemen River, they had 40 dead and 80 wounded. The Minutemen lost 25 men and 9 wounded. A 78-year-old farmer from Minutemen named Samuel Whitmore killed 3 British soldiers before he was shot in the face and bayoneted several times. He survived his wounds and died in 1793 at the age of 96. When Percy's soldiers were crossing into Cambridge, a large group of militiamen were waiting for them, but since they were all bunched up together, they were easily taken care of by the British artillery. Over 4,000 minutemen were waiting for Percy's soldiers by the Great Bridge, which was nearly dismantled by General Heath's militia, but Percy ordered the troops to march down a side road, avoiding them altogether. The minutemen followed them, but they were all bunched together, and Percy ordered the artillery fired in their direction, using the rest of the cannon powder, scaring off the minutemen. Militia groups and patriots from different parts of New England began to pour in, but Percy's soldiers made it to Charlestown before nightfall. The exhausted soldiers were finally back to the safety of the friendly city. The next day, 15,000 militiamen surrounded the city of Boston and would begin a 10.5-month siege of the city. The armed conflict in the towns of Lexington and Concord would set the stage for the American Revolution, which would officially begin on July 4th, 1776, with the signing of the Declaration of Independence.